Almost every single homeowner I've ever met mows their lawn the exact same way every single time. Same starting point, same direction, same pattern, week after week, month after month, for years without ever thinking twice about it. And that one habit, doing the same thing every time because it's easy and familiar, is quietly wearing ruts into your soil, weakening your grass, and making your lawn more vulnerable to disease. And the fix takes about 5 minutes to actually implement. My name's Denny. I've spent the last 20 years working on lawns for a living, and this is one of those mistakes I see on almost every single property I walk. So let's get into exactly why it matters and how to fix it today. Here's what's actually happening every time you push that mower in the exact same pattern, week after week. Every pass of a mower, even a lightweight residential push mower, applies real pressure to the soil beneath the wheels. A single pass here and there, spread across different directions and patterns, distributes that pressure evenly across your whole lawn over time. But mowing in the identical pattern every single week concentrates that same pressure along the exact same wheel tracks, over and over, week after week, for the entire season. That repeated concentrated pressure compacts the soil specifically along those tracks, far faster than it compacts anywhere else in your yard. And compacted soil, as I've covered before, chokes off the oxygen and water access your grass roots depend on. Over the course of a single mowing season, this shows up as faint, barely visible tracking. Over 2 or 3 seasons of the exact same pattern, those tracks become genuinely visible, slightly depressed lines running across your lawn, where the grass grows thinner, duller, and struggles more than everywhere else, even though you're mowing, watering, and fertilizing that section exactly the same as the rest of the yard. There's a second problem happening at the same time, and it's one almost nobody connects to their mowing pattern at all. Grass blades that get cut from the same direction every single time develop what's called directional lean, meaning the blade actually starts growing at a slight angle in the direction it's repeatedly been pushed and cut, rather than growing straight up. This happens because the mower blade doesn't cut perfectly cleanly from every angle. It tends to lay blades over slightly in the direction of travel before the blade fully severs them, and repeating that same directional cut week after week trains the grass to grow with a consistent lean rather than standing upright. A lawn with directional lean actually photosynthesizes less efficiently than upright grass, because leaning blades receive less direct sunlight across their full surface area compared to blades standing straight up, and that reduced photosynthesis means a slightly weaker, less resilient plant overall, on top of whatever compaction damage is happening in the wheel tracks underneath it. And there's a third piece to this that ties directly into disease pressure, something I've talked about before in other contexts but rarely connected back to mowing patterns specifically. A lawn with soil compaction concentrated in specific tracks, combined with grass blades leaning in a consistent direction, creates uneven airflow across the surface of your lawn. Airflow matters enormously for how quickly grass blades dry out after watering, rain, or morning dew, and areas with restricted airflow, whether from compaction affecting drainage or from leaning blades creating a denser, more matted canopy in certain spots, stay damp longer than the rest of the lawn. That extended damp window is exactly the condition fungal diseases like brown patch and dollar spot need to establish and spread, which means a lawn mowed in the same pattern for years can develop specific disease-prone strips running through it that have nothing to do with sun exposure, watering technique, or soil type, and everything to do with a mowing habit nobody ever thought to change. Quick, before I walk you through the fix, if you're serious about addressing habits like this, instead of just treating symptoms after they show up, you need a real plan. That's why I wrote the book, a straight step-by-step blueprint to a greener lawn with fewer weeds. Exactly what to buy, where to get it, and when to put it down. Scan the QR code or click the link below to grab your copy. Here's the actual fix, and I promised you 5 minutes because that's genuinely all the extra time this takes once you understand the system. Rotate your mowing direction every single time you mow, following a simple 4-direction cycle rather than picking a random new direction each week, which tends to drift back toward whatever's easiest without a system to follow. Week 1. Mow north to south, straight rows running from the top of your yard to the bottom. Week 2. Mow east to west, running perpendicular to the previous week's pattern. Week 3. Mow on a diagonal, roughly 45 degrees from your original north-south line. Week 4. Mow on the opposite diagonal, crossing the week 3 pattern at roughly 90 degrees. Then start the cycle over again at week 5 with north to south. That's the entire system. 4 directions rotating on a continuous loop. And figuring out which direction you mowed last time takes about 5 seconds of glancing at your lawn before you even start the mower, since you can usually see faint striping from the previous cut if you look closely. This simple rotation solves all 3 problems at once, and it's worth understanding exactly how. Rotating wheel tracks across 4 different directions means no single strip of soil ever takes repeated compaction pressure week after week, since the wheels are running over different ground on each pass instead of the identical path every time. Rotating cutting direction prevents grass blades from developing a consistent directional lean, since a blade that gets pushed one direction this week and the opposite direction 2 weeks later never settles into that habitual growth angle and instead grows straighter and more upright overall, which improves photosynthesis efficiency across the whole lawn. And more upright, evenly growing grass with soil that isn't compacted into specific tracks dries more evenly and predictably after watering or rain, closing down those specific disease-prone strips that used to form along your old fixed pattern. 3 separate problems, 1 5-minute habit change, and the only cost is remembering which direction you mowed last time, which becomes automatic within a few weeks of actually doing it. Let me walk you through what you'll actually notice as you make this switch, because the timeline here is genuinely faster than most fixes I talk about. Since you're not waiting on a biological process, you're just changing a mechanical habit. Weeks 1 through 3. Honestly, you probably won't notice much difference yet, though if you've got an eye for it. You might start seeing slightly less defined mower striping since the pattern is changing each week instead of reinforcing the same lines. Weeks 4 through 6. This is where existing wheel track compaction, if it's been building for a while, starts to show early signs of easing, particularly if you're pairing this with regular watering that's now reaching soil that used to be too compacted to absorb it well. By around the 2 to 3 month mark, most lawns that had visible tracking or thin strips from years of single-direction mowing show a genuinely noticeable evening out, the previously thin, dull strips filling back in and matching the color and density of the rest of the yard. Since the soil underneath is no longer taking that same concentrated weekly pressure and the grass above it is finally growing upright instead of leaning. There's a related mistake worth catching while we're on the subject of mowing habits, because it compounds directly with the directional lean problem I just walked through. A dull mower blade doesn't cut grass cleanly. It tears it, ripping the top of the blade rather than slicing through it in one clean motion. And that torn edge is functionally an open wound on the plant, losing moisture faster than a clean cut would and giving fungal spores an easier entry point into the tissue. Combine a dull blade with a fixed mowing direction, and you're tearing the grass at the same angle in the same direction week after week, which makes that directional lean I described even more pronounced, since a torn blade tends to fold and lean more dramatically than a cleanly sliced one. Most homeowners should be sharpening their mower blade about twice a season, once in spring before the heavy growth starts, and once around midsummer, and you can do a rough check anytime by pulling a few blades of grass out of your lawn and looking at the cut tip. Clean green sharp-edged tips mean your blade is doing its job. White, stringy, frayed tips mean it's time to sharpen, and pairing a freshly sharpened blade with your new rotating mowing pattern gives you the cleanest, most upright, most disease-resistant cut your lawn can get without spending a dime on any product at all. I want to be honest about why almost nobody teaches this, and it's not because it's some closely guarded secret. It's because it's genuinely boring advice that doesn't fit neatly into a product or a bag. There's no fertilizer to sell for rotating your mowing pattern. No bottle, no spreader attachment, nothing with a barcode. It's purely a habit change, and habit changes are a much harder sell than a product with a label and a price tag. So it just doesn't get the same airtime in most lawn care content, even though it's one of the lowest effort, zero-cost improvements available to basically every single homeowner with a mower. I genuinely put this in my top 5 free fixes for any lawn, right alongside raising your mower deck height and sharpening your blade, because all 3 cost nothing beyond a small adjustment to how you're already doing something you were going to do anyway. One question I get constantly once people understand this rotation is whether it ruins the clean striped look a lot of homeowners want, the kind of alternating light and dark stripes you see on a well-kept lawn or a baseball field. And the honest answer is that striping and this rotation actually work together just fine once you understand what's actually creating that stripe effect. Those stripes aren't a different mowing pattern at all. They're purely a light reflection effect created by a roller behind the mower deck bending the grass blades in opposite directions on adjacent passes, which makes one row reflect light differently than the row next to it. You get that same striped look regardless of whether you're mowing north-south this week or east-west next week, since the stripe effect comes from the back-and-forth bending within a single mowing session, not from which direction that session happens to run in. So you can absolutely rotate through the 4-direction cycle every week and still get a beautifully striped lawn every single time you mow. The stripes will simply run in a different direction depending on the week, which if anything looks more intentional and well-maintained than the exact same static stripe pattern running the same way every single time for years on end. There's one more small habit worth pairing with this rotation, because it addresses a related issue that shows up specifically at the edges of your mowing pattern, rather than in the wheel tracks themselves. Most homeowners mow in a way that creates a consistent turning pattern at the ends of each pass, pivoting the mower in roughly the same spots along your property line or driveway edge every single time. And those turning spots take even more concentrated pressure than a straight pass does, since the mower is pivoting on essentially one point, rather than rolling forward evenly. If you notice specific worn, thin patches right at the corners of your yard or right where your mowing rows typically end and turn, that's very likely the turning pressure concentrating in that exact spot week after week, the same underlying problem as the wheel tracks, just more intense because of the pivoting motion. As you rotate your overall mowing direction through the 4-week cycle, those turning points naturally shift around your property too, since a north-south pattern turns in different spots than an east-west or diagonal pattern does, which means this same 5-minute fix is quietly solving that secondary problem as well, without any additional effort on your part. If you're running a riding mower or a zero turn on a larger property, this same principle applies, but the compaction risk is actually higher, not lower, and it's worth understanding why before you assume a bigger machine means less to worry about. A riding mower or zero turn carries significantly more weight than a push mower, sometimes several hundred pounds more once you factor in the engine, deck, and a seated operator, and that weight is concentrated onto a relatively small tire contact area, which means the pressure per square inch on your soil during every pass is meaningfully higher than a lightweight push mower ever produces. Zero-turn mowers add an additional wrinkle, since their turning mechanism relies on one wheel spinning while the other holds relatively still, which creates a scuffing, twisting motion at every turning point that's considerably harder on soil structure than a simple pivot. If you're managing a larger property with one of these machines, the 4-direction rotation matters even more than it does for a standard push mower lawn, and it's worth being extra deliberate about varying not just your overall direction, but also where your turning and pivot points land each time you mow, since those zero-turn pivot spots are exactly where you'll see the most dramatic compaction and thinning if they're allowed to repeat in the same location week after week. It's also worth mentioning where this whole problem essentially disappears on its own, because it's relevant if you've ever considered making the switch. Robotic mowers, the kind that run on a schedule and navigate your yard using a boundary wire or GPS mapping, solve this entire issue automatically without you ever having to think about direction rotation at all. Because these machines mow in essentially randomized or algorithmically varied patterns across many short sessions throughout the week, rather than one long pass in a single fixed direction. They never concentrate wheel pressure or cutting direction in the same tracks the way a traditional weekly mow does. Lawns maintained by robotic mowers over a full season typically show remarkably even soil density and none of the visible tracking or directional lean patterns that traditional mowing habits can produce over time, purely as a side effect of how these machines happen to operate rather than anything explicitly programmed for lawn health. I'm not telling you to go buy a robotic mower just to solve this one problem. A few dollars worth of attention to your mowing pattern accomplishes the same thing for free. But it's a useful bit of context for understanding that this compaction and lean issue isn't some unavoidable law of lawn care. It's specifically a side effect of the repetitive fixed pattern mowing habit most of us fall into without ever meaning to. One last small piece worth folding into this same routine, since it takes almost no extra effort once you're already varying your mowing pattern. Whatever direction you trim along a fence line, driveway edge, or garden bed border with a string trimmer, try rotating that too. Even something as simple as trimming left to right one week and right to left the next along the same edge. String trimmers create a similar, smaller scale version of the directional lean problem right along the narrow strip where they operate. And that strip already tends to be more vulnerable since it's often thinner and more exposed to reflected heat from a driveway or sidewalk than the rest of the lawn. It's a minor addition on top of the main mowing rotation. But since you're already building the habit of checking which direction you did things last time, tacking the trimmer onto that same mental checklist costs you nothing extra and keeps that border strip just as healthy as everywhere else you've already fixed. Here's your plan, and it genuinely takes less time to implement than it took to watch this video. Next time you mow, take note of which direction you're cutting, and write it down somewhere simple, a sticky note on the mower, a note in your phone, whatever's easiest to actually check before you start next time. Follow the 4-direction rotation, north-south, east-west, diagonal, opposite diagonal, and then cycle back to the start. Keep that rotation going indefinitely, every single time you mow, with no exceptions for a quick trim or a day when you're in a hurry, because consistency in the rotation is what actually breaks the compaction and lean pattern you've built up over however many years you've been mowing the same way. And if you've already got visible thin strips or tracking from years of single-direction mowing, pair this rotation with the deep, infrequent watering approach and give it a full 2 to 3 months before judging results, since you're asking the soil and the grass above it to genuinely recover from a habit that's been reinforced for a long time. That's the whole fix. And it's one of the only things I talk about on this channel that cost you absolutely nothing and takes less time to do than it takes to explain. Thanks a lot for watching, and let me know in the comments which direction you've been mowing in, without ever really thinking about it, because I'd bet most of you have been running the exact same pattern for years. Now, if you're serious about fixing your lawn without wasting more money guessing at products, you need the right equipment and a plan. My book appearing on your screen right now is a straight step-by-step blueprint to a greener lawn with fewer weeds, exactly what to buy, where to get it, and when to put it down. Scan the QR code or click the link below to get your copy. Or head over to fixyourlawnin30days.com to get the lawn you deserve. Have a good day, and I'll see you in the next one.